Yeah.
It goes ziplet.
You're on.
Hey, good morning, Facebook and YouTube. This is Jim Blythe, Veterans Impact Show. Joining me today, two very good friends, Marc Liebman, author, SAR rescue pilot, great friend, historian, and he's my co-host today. And we're going to be talking about the 4th of July and the Declaration of Independence. Stay right with us. We'll be right back with Dave Carey, POW. Welcome to the Veterans Impact Show, where our motto is Charlie Mike. Continue the mission. I'm your host, Jim Blythe, U.S. Navy Vietnam veteran and certified senior advisor. Join me as we feature veterans who continue the mission of leadership and commitment in our communities after serving our great nation. Why, you never know who you're going to meet or where we're going to go. So welcome aboard. Well, great day, and I'm here to just tell you, hey, we're coming up on Independence Day, the 4th of July. We're going to have a great program today. Joining me, two very good friends. First of all, on the screen, Dave Carey. Dave was a pilot in my squadron, VA 163. He got to join the elite group of POWs August 31st, 1967. Just, as you said, right outside of High Pond, didn't you, Dave?
Oh,
and
yeah.
You were incarcerated 5.5 years as a POW. And today what we're going to talk about is memories of 4th of July, but what you guys did to thrive and to come together and work together. And this is also a promo because my church Gateway is welcoming you on Saturday, and you're going to be speaking to some of the leadership and staff and people in our church about working together. And everybody knows Gateway's gone through some problems, but we brought in the very best that talks about how do you survive the tough stuff. And that's Dave Carey. Also joining me, SAR rescue pilot, author, historian, great friend, Marc Liebman. Marc, man, you flew the helicopters to try and go get these guys.
I did. Unfortunately, we didn't get Dave. But then again, I wasn't there those days, so.
You'd have done it. I know you.
Yeah, I'd have got him. I wish.
You're not the only one that wishes.
Yeah, and I met Dave Carey in, I believe it was 2012, when I went to the first reunion of our Saint Squadron. Mm-hmm. And actually, you were sitting next to my wife, and she probably talked your arm off.
I did.
And we were all just, when you got up and spoke, mm-hmm. I was just, wow, amazed what you talked about. But if you could, because we're limited today, what were some of your memories of, for instance, the holidays like the 4th of July? What did they do or not do, or what did you guys do?
Well, we were, their tactic was to try to keep us isolated, cell by cell by cell. And so our efforts were to keep ourselves connected however we could. And we mostly did it with a lot of tapping on the walls and various hand codes and things like that. But the holidays were pretty much left to ourselves. The 4th of July was no biggie, of course, for the North Vietnamese. We observed the 4th of July generally by having the Pledge of Allegiance and the Lord's Prayer. And I mean, it was a little mixing of church and state there, but we thought it'd be okay under the circumstances. And we would then tell stories about what we remembered about, in this case, the 4th of July, or you know, you would talk about what Christmas was like when you were growing up, and because we had a lot of time on our hands, you could go into as much detail as you wanted to get into. And actually, I mentioned Christmas. The first Christmas I ever spent away from my family, I was in a prison cell in Hanoi, North Vietnam. And that was pretty much a downer. Fortunately, I lived with a couple of guys that didn't allow me to get too morose over the whole situation.
So one of the big things is all of you guys, which they were trying to isolate, you figured out ways to communicate and work
Mhm.
together and come together to
Mhm.
lift each other up.
Mhm.
You developed a code, and it couldn't be Morse code, but you developed your own code, and you
Mhm.
were tapping on the walls and doing all this and watching. It was pretty amazing when you talk about that,
Mhm.
how you work together
Mhm.
as a team.
Yeah, that was really the saving grace, was that we were there together. And so we took care of each other. We looked after each other. We kept each other's spirits up. I mean, you could get sad and down and go sit in a corner for a while, but nobody was going to let you sit in the corner for too long. And there are various ways to get you out of the corner. So we had, and we knew that we had to be able to connect with each other, not just in a cell, but throughout the various prisons that we were in. We knew that we had to be in touch with each other. That I don't know how we knew that. You know, it was like instinct or something. We just knew that we had to be connected to each other. And so that really was our saving grace, was we were able to figure out how to do those kinds of things. And not without risk, but we were still able to do those kinds of things.
To give you a little background for the audience, a little background,
Mhm.
VA 163, that Dave was in, was a squadron that I was in. I didn't know him at that time because I got there about 2 weeks later after he went down. But our squadron was, I think, well, we had the highest casualty rate in the Navy during Vietnam. We had
Yeah.
12 killed in action. We had 5 POWs. You were one of them.
Mhm.
John McCain was one of them. Stockdale was our CAG flying one of our planes.
Yep.
Your wingman was also there.
Al Stafford.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so we had 5 POWs.
Mhm.
I mean, we were right there in the front for all of them. If you'd have been there, Mark, you'd have been real busy trying to keep these guys.
Yeah, so I didn't arrive till a couple years after Dave was shot down.
Mhm.
And in fact, when I arrived, it was in one of the bombing halts. The only thing we were doing was reconnaissance missions
Mhm.
over the north. You know, they'd fly RA-5s or RF-8s, escorted by a couple fighters, and they'd get shot at, and occasionally they get bagged. But it got more entertaining my second journey there.
When you also flew off the Oriskany for a while, didn't you?
Yeah, so we were vagabonds, I think, when I was in Det 110, we were vagabonds.
Mm-hmm.
So we would go, carriers would show up on Yankee Station, they go off Yankee Station 30 days later. Well, if you're on that carrier, we got to stay on Yankee Station. So we would pack up our cruise boxes and make sure we got all our laundry, particularly if you knew the ship was going home, because if it went to port and it came back, you could pick it up later. But if it went back to San Diego or the East Coast, never see it again. So we pack up our cruise boxes and we go 30, 40 miles from the other to another carrier. But I spent more time on what they call DLGs those days. We call them CGs, literally off the coast in North SAR and South SAR. And so that was a different world. 12 guys, sometimes 15 guys, helicopter, 2 officers. And we operate off the back of the boat, back of a ship.
And you were landing a helicopter instead of on a flight deck, on a helo deck, that you had some clearances that were pretty tight sometimes.
Yeah, in the H2, it wasn't too bad. When we got the H3s, there are some of the ships where the clearance was 18 inches between the tips of the rotor blades and something solid, like the superstructure of the ship, which was more solid than a rotor blade. And if you hit it, it would ruin everybody's day. The captain would be really pissed because he'd have a fireball on the back of his ship, and it was career threatening. You didn't care because by that time you were dead. But and we did it day and night, good weather and bad. That's why I have gray hair.
I thought it was because you're older than I am.
No, it's because that's when that and the takeoffs are really actually worse. But anyway, I don't want to talk about that. But it was actually a lot more boring than people think, because in the H2s we sat 2-minute alert because we only had 2.5 hours of gas. So we'd sit there and hopefully nobody gets shot down. If they got shot down, we'd launch. In the H3s, we did a little of that, and then we'd orbit off the planned egress route of the strikes coming off out of North Vietnam, and that was either South Round Vin, off South Scar, or North Scar. And then you also had to scramble, because if the ship was a guided missile shooter and the missile launcher was on the aft end, and they decided they were MiGs out, they wanted to go bag a MiG, and so we'd have to launch, because if they launched the Terrier missiles, they'd fry our helicopter.
Yeah.
Oh boy!
And that'd get me in trouble with my CO.
Yeah.
One of the things is when we were at sea, and Dave, you were at sea in July 4th of 1967. It was just like any other day. And, you know, really wasn't a big deal. We didn't get a chance to even think about it because we were so cotton picking busy. Yeah. Very, very focused. It was, this is the mission. We got to get you guys off the deck and back safely aboard. We got to get you guys, you know, positioned and off the deck and safely back. And, you know, it was a huge orchestrated dance of chaos, but it worked.
Yeah. So if you're a flying plane guard, you were in the same boat that Dave was, and is it, you know, the flight schedule was out there, and you had to have helicopters ready. We had to have a primary that would fly, and then you have a backup in case the primary went down, which it often did. Generally at night, so yeah, there was always something happening. It was never a dull moment. And then you shut down. And what a lot of people don't realize is, for a 12-hour flying day, which is typically which we ran roughly 12 hours, it was 16 hours for the flight deck crew.
Yeah.
And 24 hours a day for the guys who maintain the airplanes and helicopters.
Dave, I'd like to go back. You said that one of the things you guys did was you shared the memory of your childhood. Do you remember what the story was that you shared with your fellow compatriots there in Hanoi? Do you remember what that story was? Because was that stick out in your mind even today of what your childhood memory of the 4th of July was?
Now you're really putting me to the test.
He does that a lot.
Yeah, he does that a lot. No, no, not specifically. I can't remember that. I do remember that growing up, we would 4th of July would be a picnic day. My father was a truck driver, and so over the road truck driver, and so lots of times he was gone. But back then we lived very close to relatives, and so the greater family would get together and with or without my father and go someplace for a picnic. And I remember things like tossing horseshoes and playing badminton and volleyball and those kinds of things. It was a family day. Nowadays, of course, we live much more, at least some of us live much more scattered lives. And so getting family together is a much bigger challenge. And that's not such a good thing in my mind. We draw our strength from each other and from our connections. It's good for us to have those connections, A, and B, it's good for us to collectively celebrate and remember important things like the 4th of July, important national things, as well as important personal and family occasions. So it's I just don't remember specific stories from or what. And quite frankly, I might have made up some pretty good stuff.
Yeah, I know you were the great French teacher and the great piano player.
Yeah,
Marc,
we
let me
had
turn
time.
to Marc. What was one of your childhood memories?
Okay, so I'm an Air Force brat,
Mm-hmm.
and so we're living in Germany, and most of our so this is 50s and 60s. So this is close to very close to the end of World War II. So 55 is 10 years after the end of the war. So there was always a squadron picnic. So if my dad was assigned to a squadron, there was a squadron picnic on the 4th of July. And then if he was in a staff billet, there was a staff, that staff would have an event, which was what my mother would refer to, and my wife, lovely wife Betty of 50 some odd years, also refers to as command performances. So you had to go, the kids had to go as well, but it was kind of a dual event. I will tell you, I do have one. I was 22 years old. So on June 30th, 69, I finished my last flight at HT8, passed my check ride. Then I had the terrifying event. I had to go take my physical, which I couldn't get scheduled till July 2nd, because I knew I didn't have 20/20 vision. And if you didn't pass the flight physical, you couldn't get your wings, even though you qualified. And so I walked in, and and the corpsman says, hi, Lieutenant, how are you doing? I'm doing great. He says, how'd things go? I just took my last flight. Yeah, that's what it says here. How's your eyes and your hearing? Oh, it's great. Signs it off. And out the door I go as fast as I can. So on July 5th, which is, my dad put my Navy wings on my chest. And that is my favorite 4th of July story. And then 29 years later, I think it was 2000, that was 69. So 2002, June, in mid to late June, I took that original set of wings and pinned it on my son's chest, who flew F-18s, by the way, in the deck in the hangar bay of the USS Lexington, on which I CQ'd in a T-28. And there were tears streaming down my face and my wife's face and my brother's face, because my father had passed away by then, but he and my son were great, had really bonded in there, and when he was a teenager, and my dad was there.
4th of July is all about family. And guys, we're talking about togetherness, family, and the importance of that. We've got Dave Carey, POW, tremendous author, The Ways We Choose. We're going to put up your website in just a little bit, Dave, when we come back. And Marc Liebman, author, helicopter rescue pilot. You two guys would have made greatest friends in the world way back then. But you were a little bit separated. All right, we're going to be right back after these words from all of our partners. And I want to say, Fairway Independent Mortgage, thank you so much for being on board. Your NMLS number is 2289 and mine is 33518. We're going to be right back and say, hey, thank you for being on board during the 4th of July weekend. We're here for you. This is Veterans Impact Show. Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. And thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation. Hey, this is a blast for me. We're going back and we're talking about 4th of July. We're talking about the importance of family and how when we were kids, family came together for picnics. And Dave, you made a point that was so powerful about how the togetherness and the family, and you guys in Hanoi, in the prison camps, were able to recreate that as much as you could through your limited communication. And you did the Pledge of Allegiance and you did the Lord's Prayer. You came together to help each other out. Now, as a child, I remember going with my grandparents and my dad and mom down to Corsicana and then to a little town of Chatfield, where my mother's family had been from. And we had the 4th of July picnic at the volunteer fire department. at the schoolhouse.
Mm.
And it was, you know, all of this diverse, wonderful community, and these ladies laid out these tables full of fabulous food, pies, cakes, fried chicken, ham, hamburger, you name it. I mean, they had it. And I was, as a little kid, boy, that was the greatest thing in the world. But it was all of the community came together, united in basically this fundraiser for the volunteer fire department. And it was volleyball, it was baseball, it was horseshoes, as you said, Dave. We were all laughing together, everybody in the little community.
Yep.
And I think that that's something that we're missing some of that today. So Diane and I on the 4th of July will be videotaping the 4th of July with the Highland Park, and our Sea Cadets are going to be there, and they're going to be leading that parade as their color guard. And I got to tell you, it brings back, in the little town of Highland Park that is in the middle of Dallas, it brings back that little town flavor. And I think that's some of what we're missing today is the little town flavor, the picnic.
I agree. No, I think that we've become disconnected because of this godforsaken, I got to get in the picture here, tool, because people spend more time on this than doing what we're doing right now, which is an old-fashioned last century thing called having a conversation.
Wow.
And we can talk about various things and have a good time doing it. And I'm sitting here panicked because I forgot to turn my phone off. Anyway, Jim, I want to talk about something. One of the things I remember about my childhood on 4th of July, but also on Thanksgiving, and Memorial Day, is growing up in Germany. The Germans didn't understand any of this. They had Christmas, they had Easter, they had traditional holidays, but this whole idea about going out and having a picnic. I'm not saying Germans don't have picnics, but getting together, a family together for a celebration of the country's independence was in many ways a foreign concept in the 50s and 60s to Germany. And they would look at us as kind of the verrückte Amerikaner, which is the crazy Americans. And we got a lot of criticism, and I've read about this for years in the press about the U.S. would go to foreign countries, we create a little enclave of little America. Yes, we did. And the older I get to realize that, yes, that was important because it kept us together in a foreign environment. Did we get out in the local economy? Most of us did. Some didn't. Some only went to the exchange and the clubs and stuff like that, and the commissary. But the vast majority of us, then again, we lived on the economy. But the vast majority of the people I knew would get out and mingle with the local population, and spreading a little bit of Americana. But the whole idea of getting together and celebrating is because I would invite my German friends, because I went to a Deutsche Kinderschule. I would invite them to these kinds of events, and they were just flabbergasted. Partly also, I think, because the amount of food that we would have, because again, in post-war Germany, there were years where there were a lot of lean times, clothes, food, even medical care, because the country was literally destroyed.
Yeah. Without a doubt. And in doing this, again, coming together, that's one of the biggest problems I see right now for various reasons. Political factions, news media is trying to tear us apart. And that's one of the points I want to make. Also, Dave, when you came home, you were an honored POW. That flight, you went from Hanoi to what? The Philippines to Japan. How did that transpire? But how did you feel? How did you get received by people?
Yeah, we were released as a result of President Nixon and Henry Kissinger's efforts to end that conflict, and part of the withdrawal of U.S. troops was going to be the release of prisoners, and so we were the 14th of March, 1973, I was flown in a United States Air Force C-141 from Hanoi to Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines. And we were taken to the hospital, see the doctors, see the shrinks, see the psychiatrists, see the chaplains, get an air intelligence guy attached to our shoulder to start debriefing us, get uniforms, and about 4 or 5 days later, we were flown back to various military installations in the United States. I flew to, well, I'm from Pennsylvania originally, but I wanted to go to California because at the time I was either engaged or almost engaged to a gal in California who waited for me, and so I flew into Travis Air Force Base in California. The Navy brought my family to California for 2 weeks, and we had a wonderful reunion there. Let me back up for a second. We came home. The ex-POWs came home. We were treated like heroes. I think that happened because, this is my interpretation, the country was so torn up by Vietnam and so looking for something good to come out of it that when the first group was released and Jerry Denton, the senior officer in that group, walked up to a microphone and said what he said, we became instant heroes, or the healing thing to come out of Vietnam.
And Dave, let me tell you something. We got to go for the break, but you still are a hero in my mind. Not were. You still are, and all of you have done so much. So we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. And thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation. I got to tell you, this is bringing back a lot of memories. Excuse me. We're talking about being together in family in the 4th of July and what that meant in terms of family. You in Germany, and then Dave in Pennsylvania as a child, but again as a POW and coming back, and he was honored. When you and I came back, Mark,
we were treated like crap.
Yeah, that's right.
I was spit on, and I'll never forget this. This blonde-headed kid gets in my face, screaming at me, spits on me, calling me all kinds of names, and he didn't know who I was. He didn't know where I'd been. He didn't know anything about me, and he didn't, and I just turned around and walked away because I think he was trying to create an incident. And when I got home back to Dallas, I took off my uniform, put it in a box. I've still got it, and I went to college.
By the way, in the box, it shrunk.
Yes, it did. It did.
Yeah, it shrunk.
I want to tell you a funny story about this because I too was spat on. I had my tires slashed. I was egged. So I was wearing a hat it has Desert Storm Vietnam Veteran on the top of it. Jim's seen it. I don't like to wear. I'm a naval officer, Dave. I don't wear hats inside unless I'm on watch, right?
Right.
And so I took my three oldest grandsons to the Peterson Car Museum in LA. It's on the edge of Beverly Hills. It's a wonderful museum. So we walk out of the museum and we're walking to the restaurant, and this woman who's roughly my age stops and says, "Sir, I want to shake your hand and apologize to you." And I looked at this woman like, WFTO. I won't translate that because this is a family show. But I looked at her like, "What are you? Who are what? And she said, "Sir, I was one of those people that treated you guys poorly at the end of the Vietnam War. I realize now it was wrong. And every time I see somebody wearing a hat that says Vietnam vet, I walk up to them and I apologize to them. It's my penance." And I thought, oh, wow, this is really cool. And so we talked for a few minutes. She asked me what I did. And she asked me, was I treated poorly? Well, meanwhile, I have 3 kids ranging from 15 to 10, I guess. And that when that happened, watching them, I was like, Grampy, what is going on here? So that led to an interesting lunch discussion about what happened to me when I came back from Vietnam. So anyway, so there is hope for the healing. I think a lot of it's maturity. I also think it's because 536 people in Washington, D.C. have not read the Constitution of the United States recently, nor do they understand what's in it, if they have, or the Declaration of Independence recently.
Well, again, the Declaration of Independence is the foundation for this day. And what we talked about with the emotional things of family and picnic and coming together, and you guys in Hanoi. One of the things is a lot of people don't know some of the history and the foundation of this. And you were going to, talk about the Declaration of Independence, Mark, because you're not only a great author, but a great historian.
So let me give you a quick overview of how it came about. There was a gentleman from Virginia by the name of Richard Henry Lee, puts a motion forth on the Continental Congress in 1776 and said, hey, we ought to declare we're independent. Now understand, the founding fathers had, on April 19th, 1775, decided to take on the most powerful and richest nation in the world at the time. And the war was not going well. And so they wrote this thing in a month. They form a committee of 5 people. Jefferson writes it because he had the best handwriting, and also he was known as a good wordsmith. So Jefferson writes it. It's no doubt that it's in his hand. The original document's in his hand, and it's voted on, and it's approved, and lo and behold, it's translated into one other language, which is, of all things, was German.
Really?
Yeah. So let me get, and the reason for that is because there were a lot of Germans living in Pennsylvania, and the guy who printed the first copies was a gentleman who had a print shop by the name of Benjamin Franklin. And I think the most interesting thing was how this thing was disseminated. In the colonies at the time, there was a thing called Royal Mail. Franklin was at one time the Postmaster General for North America. But anyway, so they printed a few copies because paper was expensive. It was heavy and it was big, and they shipped it because there was the things called packet ships that ran up and down the East Coast to the ports. You could actually send a document from Philadelphia to New York City in a letter in overnight. It literally was overnight or 2 days, which is something we can still do today. But the fact of the matter is, so you got copies. At the time, there were about 200 to 300 newspapers and gazettes, as some of them were called, in the United States. They all had printing presses. So since there was no internet, and there's no FedEx, whatever. So all these local printing presses got a copy, and then they typeset this thing. Now, typesetting in those days was not sitting down at a computer. You literally did it one letter at a time, and you did it backwards. Okay. And I can get into the typesetting process. So it's pretty laborious. So then you printed one copy at a time. You put the sheet of paper onto the press, you turn the wheel, and the thing press down the paper, it printed. You checked it. If the ink was okay, you did a couple more copies. Then you smeared ink on the press. Anyway, so now you got copies in every small town in the United States. And what they did is, because only about 30% of the population could read, they went into taverns, and people would sit in or homes, and they would gather together in churches and synagogues, and they'd gather together, and somebody who could read would read the Declaration of Independence to the assembled group of people. And that's so within about a month or two, this thing was all over the place. Washington got a copy of it and had the officers read the Declaration of Independence to each of their officers so that everybody knew what we were fighting for. It's a fabulous document. Don't get me wrong. But I will also tell you that it was not created as an out of thin air. The guys who wrote it, which was originally the draft and the notes, were John Adams and Thomas Paine, a little bit of Jefferson, a lot of Ben Franklin. It all came, most of the concepts came from 2 people. John Locke, who was an English philosopher who wrote 2 treatises on government and a bunch of other things. And then the French philosopher, who, by the way, was still alive at this time, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And I can't, my memory just went as to what he wrote. But anyway, they borrowed liberally from their concepts. And Rousseau lived long enough to see the United States become independent. He did not live long enough to see the results of the French Revolution. But anyway, this document became the foundation of not only the document ours, but also for people wanting independence from Austria-Hungary and Belgium and the Netherlands. The French used it as part of the French Revolution. Simon Bolivar translated it into Spanish to use it for in in Bolivia and other revolutions in South America. It became one of the most widely disseminated documents around the world, and that led to the foundation of a lot of other I'll use the word revolutions. I don't, but other concepts that found their way into other governments.
It's a hugely important document, and without a doubt, it was the foundation and the start. And it was basically people reacted against tyranny. People reacted against oppression.
Yeah, so they borrowed a lot from Thomas Paine's Rights of Man. Rousseau's treatise was a social contract. I couldn't think of it. I had to look it up. But it is a very, very fundamental document. There's no other document like this anywhere in the world that was at least created at the time. People point to the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta had nothing to do with this. This is between the nobles and the king, and the nobles wanting some protection on their rights. It had nothing to do with the common man. And that's why the Constitution of the United States starts with 3 important words: we the people.
Yeah.
There's another thing in this. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed with by their creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That was the basic concept. And yes, there was a portion of the population that wasn't that way, the slaves. And it took basically, I guess,
70 years.
Yeah, to be able to set that straight. And this is a season when we celebrate not only the 4th of July, but we just celebrated Juneteenth. And a lot of people are like, what is that? That was when the slaves found out in the state of Texas, a ship pulled into Galveston and basically announced, by the way, the Emancipation Proclamation.
I want to point out about another minority that didn't get its rights. So not only was slavery a bad thing, and it took 70 years to be fully stricken from the U.S. Legal system, so to speak. But also that began actually in 1803 with some laws in Congress. But the other one group that makes up roughly half the population, regardless of skin color, race, ethnicity, whatever, are women.
Oh, yeah.
And women didn't get the right to vote until the 1920s. Yeah. So a lot of the things that were in the Declaration of Independence, it was, didn't fully mature or realized until for another couple hundred years. And and people say, well, this is a bad thing. They should have done this instantly. Well, in the age of the internet, where things happen instantly, that's possibly true. But back in those days, no.
It was a different culture too.
Different culture. Things just took a lot longer.
But the basic concept, the basic framework, just like you talk about being in Hanoi, the basic framework of communication and coming together, the basic framework was started right here with this Declaration of Independence that ultimately got us where we need to be.
Yeah.
Maybe go ahead.
We're the only nation in the world that has such founding documents.
Correct.
And if it had not been for the Declaration and subsequently the Constitution, we would there's no telling where we'd be. We'd be looking just like the rest of the world instead of being the place where everybody's trying to kick the doors down to get into.
So it's really. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Dave.
No, well, it really dates back to those documents in that time, upon which we've established this country, and so we continue to work. We got problems. We just continue to work on our problems, but we are a nation like no other.
Yeah. What's also interesting is that the United States is one of the few countries in the world that has managed to assimilate diverse populations and do it successfully.
Yeah.
We've struggled at times, but we have done it pretty well. The U.S. population, a lot of people don't know this, between 1775 and about 1860 was increasing at the rate of about 35% every 10 years. So that means that it would grow by a third. Okay. And so the number, as the population got bigger, the number of people that arrived growth, and they all came for 4 reasons. One is they were running away from something bad, either a war, a famine, religious persecution, whatever. The second thing is that we offered something that nobody else could offer, and particularly in Europe, but also in Asia, and that's land. So the United States had a boatload of land between what the Brits gave us in 1783 in the Treaty of Paris, and then the Louisiana Purchase, and then further expansion is we had land and we were willing to sell it to you at a reasonable price, and then you could do something with it. And then the last thing is we had opportunity. Again, if you grew up,
big thing.
Yeah, if you grew up in Germany or you grew up in France and your father was a cobbler, you were a cobbler. If he was a cabinet maker, you were a cabinet maker. But once you arrived in the United States, you were on your own, dude or lady, and you could do what you wanted. And the United States also, and I discovered this about a month ago, in the land acts in the late 1790s, we required every new state to set aside out of every 100 acres, at least 1 acre to put down to build a school to which everyone, men and women, could attend. And that's it's in the Land Act. I did a whole series of these on my blog, but I was astounded. We are the first country to actually sit down and say we are going to educate the population. And so from a literacy perspective of around 30%, it went up. And this is one of the things that immigrants saw as a value. I mean, I grew up in a family where, your job is to go to school, get good grades, and go off to college. College was not an option for me, and it wasn't for my children either. And there, as my grandchildren are finding out, same answer. But the fact of the matter is you could get an education. Okay. And there are ways to get it if you wanted it. And so we have public schools. England, the schools they're called public schools, but they're run by churches. Same in most other countries in Europe.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of unique things that the United States pioneered. And if we had talking heads like we have today, they would have looked at us and gone, this will never work. You need a king or a duke.
Well, if you go back in English history, they finally got rid of, I believe it was King James, and Cromwell led that. And the first thing they tried to do is crown Cromwell. And he's like, we just got rid of that. And you're wanting to do it. It was like they couldn't live in a democracy. My point being is those were the people that came over here and got this started. They took that concept of freedom and brought it over here, and that, that where they came from was a mess. Yeah. In many cases, I think it still is. But it is so important that we take a look at this and realize not only where we came from, but how they came together. And one of the things about this document, and Nathaniel had it up, you see all of these tremendous signatures, and obviously John Hancock right at the top.
56 of them.
Yeah. You know what? Every one of those men who signed that was a death sentence. They signed their own death warrant because when the English found out they were going to be hunted down and killed as leaders of this rebellion, they took a huge risk to stand up for freedom. And I think that's where you two, I'm going to say something, you two guys signed a blank check, Dave to be a fighter pilot, and you got that check cashed, and you, Mark, to be a SAR rescue pilot, and you, thank God, didn't get to cash that check.
You signed that same warrant.
I did.
Yeah.
I
So
did.
when I do a lot of speeches, I hear the music. I can't. Let's say that. But yes, the blank check, up to and anything, including one's life.
Yeah.
You bet. Yeah. Guys, we're going to come back in a minute. I want to say again, thank you to Nathaniel and Ascend Podcasting and my wife, Diane, and Joe. Thank you for being in Jacksonville. You're always here for me, buddy. And thank you for the things you send to me. I want to say thank you also again to Fairway Independent Mortgage. All they do for us, we really appreciate it. You want to have a great mortgage. You want to find out about financing of the best asset, the number one asset in America, which is your home. Get with Fairway Independent Mortgage. My MLS number is 311-548. Theirs is 2289. And we'll be right back after these words.
moved out of my chair.
Welcome back to the Veterans Impact Show. And thanks to our sponsors, Fairway Independent Mortgage and Lone Star Wealth Strategies. Now, let's continue this great conversation. Hey, it's about time for me to bring this program back into the dock. And here I've got two great Navy veterans, and in my estimation, great heroes. Dave Carey, POW, Navy captain. You came back, you flew, you did training, you helped guys with I can't like Top Gun type training.
Yeah.
You were the adversary.
We were the adversary squadron. Yeah.
But you made it to full captain. And for you Army people that don't understand an Air Force, that's the same thing as a bird colonel, right?
Yep. And in my case, they promoted me well beyond my level of competency. They would probably laugh at the same thing because I'm a JO at heart.
Well, I got to tell you something, Mark. I have a feeling that you were a pretty feisty guy back then, too.
Yeah, I spent my time in hack. And Dave probably knows exactly what I'm talking about. Because if you're a JO and you do not spend time in hack, you ain't pushing the envelope.
Yeah.
Well, and both of you guys contributed so much, and you came up to be full Navy captains, which is an amazing thing. Not everybody can pull that off. So thank you for your service. Thank you for what you did. And most of all, Dave, thank you for your book, The Ways We Choose. I think it is something that everybody should take a look at. You can go to your website. Was it davecarey.com?
Yes.
And get it. It's on Amazon. It's other places.
I posted it.
Yeah. And Diane's posted it. And we're going to have plenty of copies of your book at Gateway Church this Saturday. If you want to know more about that, just contact me, Jim Blythe, at 214-502-4600. We're welcome to have you come aboard. And Mark, your books, I just enjoy so much. And as I said, the first book of yours I read, The Cherubs 3.
Cherubs 2.
Cherubs 2.
No, I above 1,000 feet, helicopter pilots get nosebleeds.
Yeah. Well, we were talking and I called you up after I read that book, and I said, this isn't fiction. I was there on the Oriskany. This was fact. And you said, yeah, I had to change a few names to stay out of trouble.
And dates and places.
Yeah. But you chronicled that Vietnam, that era, and the air war in Vietnam and what you guys did. That's one of the most amazing books I've ever read. And then your Sail series, which is about the American Revolution and about that period of time and what they did, that's amazing as well. So both of you guys are best-selling authors and heroes, in my opinion, because any man that can fly a helicopter out over that much water and not know, sometimes your instruments went out, you guys were brave. And landing on a carrier or a
that's because we didn't know any better.
You didn't know any better.
Yeah.
I think,
right, Dave?
Yeah. That's exactly right. And I got to tell you, Mark, I really appreciated your comments about the Declaration, and a lot of those details I was unaware of. I really do appreciate your knowledge and your sharing it.
Thank you. And by the way, it's an honor to be on the show with you, Dave. I have read most of the debriefs. They were chilling to me. In fact, I know a few of them. One of your compadres, Cordier,
Ken Cordier.
Ken Cordier just passed away.
Yes.
We're losing more and more of our generation.
Yes.
And it's sad. But I think the American public has suddenly come around to realize that it's sort of now cool to be a Vietnam vet.
Yeah.
A lot of people come up to you and say, hey, thank you for your service. And I say, I'm honored to do what I did and leave it at that.
Yeah. So I grew up believing in the Declaration. I say believing in the Declaration, believing for what was in there. And that's the core to our being. And it's one of the reasons why Dave and I did what we did and and he endured what he endured. And some of us also there are times where you are off doing something in some godforsaken place where we're sent, and you literally wonder, what the blank are we doing here? But we have faith in our country. and we
Yes.
have faith in our country, men and women, and it's unshaken, although sometimes it's hard, but it's basically unshaken, because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I'm going to do my favorite quote from Churchill. You can always count on America to do the right thing. That's after they exhaust all the other alternatives.
Right. That's
And
exactly.
you guys are both career military officers. Both of you had exciting careers. Both of you had adventure. Dave, I think you'd just as soon not have had 5.5 years, but adversary, the horrible thing you went through really has contributed so much to your speaking engagements, your training of you, what you did. You're helping people worldwide, and your book helps people worldwide. And when I introduced it to my church, they were like, holy cow, look at this. This is what we need. This is pulling us together.
Yep.
And I think that's part of what we need to do. And so I just want to say thank you to both of you guys for all you've done and done for me, because you've been in it. Dave, you've been an inspiration, and Mark, you've been an inspiration. And the things you're doing with the Defense Series briefing, your books, all of these, you're continuing the mission. And Dave, you are continuing the mission. That's one of the other things. You don't just put your hand down and say, I swore a pledge and I'm finished.
That's not
We
what
continue
do.
the mission, right?
That's not in our DNA, is it,
All
Dave?
right.
No, not at all. No,
Yeah,
we're on a mission.
My wife will tell you that you can take the naval aviator out of the Navy and the warrior out of the Navy, but you cannot take the warrior of the naval aviator out of the human being. It's just she's
And
given up.
To young men and women, the military career is fabulous, and the opportunity to do amazing things, fly fighters, fly helicopters, but the camaraderie and being part of it is worth it. So I want to say a special prayer.
Amen.
Lord God of the universe, we thank you for men and women like Dave Carey and Marc Liebman, and many who served and made a career and served in serving others in what they did. And dear God, we thank you for them. And please, we put a hedge of protection around our active duty military and our first responders, wherever they are in the world, running into the fire instead of away from it. And dear God, we thank you for our veterans. And we thank you, God, that our veterans can help lead, bring this country back together, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And this we pray to your holy name. Thank you, Lord God. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Guys, it's been a blast. Share this.